In this video, I want to provide an overview about teaching through current events and controversial public policy issues. And I'll begin with current events. So in their textbook, Parker and Beck note that there are a variety of skills and abilities that are needed to work with current events. Students should be able to interpret the news, whether that is print or video. They should be able to discriminate between important and less important news items. So in that regard, they should be exposed to news broadcasts and newspapers. So the teacher needs to teach students how to interpret and utilize those sources. Students should be able to predict likely consequences of different positions. And they need to take a position on issues based on knowledge and critical evaluation of the facts. Now, there are 4 strategies for teaching current events. First is a daily discussion of news. So newspapers, world newspapers, television networks on the internet, political cartoons. Decision-making on controversial issues, which is what we'll be talking about the remainder of this video. Teaching about different kinds of controversy, such as definitional controversies. What is something mean? And value controversies. What should be done or why does something happen? And writing about issues, such as dialogical essays, short essay format, and persuasive letters to the editor. So I want to talk mainly about controversial issues in the social studies. Now I do want to start by saying one thing, that predominantly students and teachers think about controversial issues as the hot button social topics that we should not touch in classrooms or schools, such as abortion, firearms, religion, abortion, all of these issues that provoke condemnation or concern, teacher fear about retribution from parents or administrators by tackling these issues. These are not the type of questions that I am encouraging you to investigate in your elementary classroom. Rather, I encourage you to get into controversial public policy issues. These controversial issues are more mundane in nature. They are things that we are experiencing on a daily basis in our local or state communities, and they're ones that really no parent would have a problem with investigating in the classroom. So in the social studies, controversial issues are seen as questions of public policy that spark significant disagreement. So, for instance, what should we do about whatever the topic is? These are authentic questions about the kinds of public policies that should be adopted to address public problems, and they are not hypothetical. So these should be very real issues. Such issues require deliberation among we to determine which policy is the best response to a particular problem. That means students should be encouraged to deliberate and discuss with one another about what should be done in relation to a particular problem. So initial activities that could assist in teaching controversial issues. So the beginning of a lesson, also throughout the learning experience in a controversial issue-minded lesson, students should be reviewing primary and secondary sources, historical documents, newspaper articles, watching videos, looking at images. Students should also, again, use videos, so watch film clips or documentaries that help generate student interest and build background knowledge. If you're worried about students' reading abilities or their level in comprehension, many news stories are posted as videos and also in writing. So for instance, your local TV channel will have both the print version of their news broadcast and the video version. So while students are reading a print copy, they could be watching the broadcast version of it with the story, and they tend to be word for word. You can also be doing inquiry-based investigations, where you allow students to construct understanding based upon experience, such as science labs or through historical inquiry. There are other strategies that are very beneficial in the learning experience of controversial issues that require students to dialogue and work with one another. For instance, take a stand, or a line of contention continuum. This is a strategy that I've used many times in this class over the years, where you would have students deciding whether they fall on a line of yes, maybe, and no. And you could have students moving from space to space depending on the question. So it becomes a living, moving line in your class depending on the questions that you are asking. This helps students understand that social studies is not a black and white enterprise. There's a lot of gray, and that opinions can change based upon new evidence. Also, students can role play. You can provide students with scenarios and role cards and have them deliberate an issue from their role perspective. But it's also helpful to conclude with a discussion from their own perspective. You can also have town hall meetings where students are assigned to small groups with their identified goals, and groups can prepare presentations for a town hall meeting to argue their point with the teacher presiding. And adaptations can include students discussing with other groups prior to town hall meetings to determine support for their position. For instance, you may have 4 groups, and they may have there may be another group that would agree mostly with their perspective, and that would work well with an upper elementary lesson plan. You could also be doing mock trials, whether that's a reader's theater of an existing trial or snippets of a trial, or one that you enact in the classroom. You can also have students debate. They can do small and whole group discussions. You need to make sure in debates that you have the rules for debates, such as opening and closing arguments, turn taking, appropriate response, assigning sides, participation or inclusion from all students. In fact, I'm not a huge fan of the term debate because that tends to denote winners and losers in the experience. I prefer deliberation because a deliberation means a full discussion of the ideas and a seeking of a compromise or a shared understanding. And that's what you want to have in these types of discussions. You can also be doing a simulation where students enact the issue in a simulated manner. So it's a game or activity that reflects the actual issues at play. And this also provides opportunity for data recording that can be used in later activities in the lesson. Finally, some ways to assess student learning in a controversial issue lesson, or even in an inquiry lesson plan. Students can write a letter, so they can individually or in small groups write a letter to a group related to the issue, a local newspaper, a business or organization. These letters do not need to be sent. You can if you would like. One thing you need to be wary of is telling students what to write. That is where teachers have gotten in trouble in the past. But if you say, here's the question, and I want you as the students to determine your perspective and what you want to say, we will bail it out, and that's perfectly fine. In fact, the standards, the SOLs, and the C3 framework encourage students to take part in such activities. Students can also write traditional persuasive essays. They can create posters or presentations. So for instance, they could create a poster for a school wall or make a presentation to their PTA or to some teachers or administrator. They might do a community service project depending on the issue. So for instance, they might want to do something related to trash pickup or recycling in the school. They may want to seek funding for a new playground equipment in their school. Something dealing with putting in the road bumps in front of the school to slow down traffic. There are many examples of those things happening in schools across this country. The thing is, you just have to provide students with the opportunity to do so. You can brainstorm alternative solutions and their feasibility. Students can think, all right, here's one solution we came up with. How else can we solve this problem? And how likely is it for it to work? And I do encourage you to think about other ideas that are reflected in your prior learning and your text readings as you seek to begin your inquiry lesson plan over the next 2 modules. To think about other ways in which you could extend on student learning, especially in the taking informed action component of the inquiry lesson. I do want to share with you 2 examples that use this framework. So with a colleague, I created 2 mini units that we modeled in our methods classes some 4 or 5 or 6 years ago. And we related them to local problems, local public policy issues. And we actually did it through an interdisciplinary manner. Interdisciplinary instruction is very important in elementary grades, especially with dealing with subjects that are not taught or tested as much, like the social studies and science. So my science colleague and I created 2 mini units, and we modeled them and worked with students and how they would play out. And we ended up having them published in 2016. So one of them dealt with Jamestown and power lines. And I believe this is still a problem going on today. There are questions about what should be done about the power lines that are going across the James River near the Jamestown historical settlement. So you'll notice our question that we had students consider. Let's say there's Jamestown right there. There's Jamestown Historical Island, and there's the power lines, and you'll be able to actually see the power lines from certain spots on there. So we posed this problem. Virginia is home to the first permanent English settlement in the Western Hemisphere, Jamestown. Jamestown was founded in 1607 and is viewed as an important part of American history. In fact, many of you have likely studied Jamestown time and again and have likely visited the site on field trips. However, Dominion Power recently announced plans to build high-rise power transmission towers within sight of Jamestown Island. This announcement has provoked opposition from historical and environmental preservationists and has resulted in court cases to prevent the construction of the towers. The question we will consider is, should Dominion Power build a high-rise transmission tower within sight of Jamestown Island? So in this learning experience, students begin by receiving a brief article published in a local newspaper, and also there's the video component, and they write an initial response. What is their initial thinking about what should be done with this question? Should Dominion Power build a high-rise transmission tower? And your colleagues, your elementary social studies and science methods peers from a few years ago, when we were doing these activities, we're providing a range of responses from yes and no, or even maybe. They weren't totally sure. So we also added in additional sources, and there are some examples there of the types of sources we used. So we provided a deliberative space within which students could explore all the viewpoints present. So we did a town hall experience or county commissioner experience, and there were 4 stakeholders: Dominion Power, which wants to build the power lines; local businesses and some citizens who want to build the power lines; the Save the James Alliance, which is against the power lines for historical and environmental reasons; and the James River Association, which is focused on the environmental protection of the river. So they used evidence and the websites and documents we provided them with to construct an argument and questions for the county commissioner meeting. And then we came together and discussed, and each group did their presentations, and then we came to additional consensus building. We left the perspectives behind and then assessed it just as people and students, not as representatives of these places. So students, we ended with writing a more informed response. And if this was actually taught, we could have done it with sending a letter or email to the representatives at play to provide support or provide insights, whatever was necessary. We also did one that was more science-oriented, dealing with what we called the case of the bald eagle, the botanical garden, and the airport. And here in Norfolk, Virginia, our airport is right next to our botanical gardens. And there had to have been, over time, bald eagles that lived at the botanical gardens, and occasionally one would get hit by an airplane landing or taking off from the airport. And we thought this was a good experience because there were issues related to this, in relation to newspaper articles and some protests. So we used the 5E method. So engaging the class, we showed them a brief video, a video clip from a local news broadcast. We then had students explore. We projected a map, we showed all kinds of different documents and everything, and then we did a simulation. It was basically a glorified game of tag where some students play the roles of eagles, some were airplanes, some were scientists and document experience. The remainder were fish bound by a certain space, and we did the scenario a certain number of times with the bald eagles living right next to the water and some living far away. Then students did some additional research through sources and then did some writing activities toward the end. None of these were very controversial in nature. They were reflected in the local environment, and your students would be engaged